like at the same time bring awareness to the adaptive population, because there's not a lot of awareness to it. I mean, I was talking to a guy at a strength and conditioning clinic last weekend that works for the Paralympics at a place down. It's like Lakeshore down in Alabama,
Yeah, Lakeshore.
I think. Yeah, he was
been
talking
there.
to me about it.
I've been there a lot when I played wheelchair basketball. So I don't know if you knew that. I played wheelchair basketball for the University of Missouri for 4 years.
Yeah, dude. And because I read an article about you and I got a bunch of information. So I can throw some questions at you.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in adaptive athletics my whole life. So that's the benefit of being born with your disability is you get involved pretty quickly. At least in my experience. So like I grew up doing wheelchair basketball, wheelchair track, sled hockey, wheelchair softball, track and field, archery. What are some of the other weird? Tennis. Tennis was a hard one. Tennis is by far the hardest wheelchair sport I've ever played outside of pickleball.
Why is that?
If you have a really good serve, it is hard to defend a really, really good serve. So if someone just like nukes the ball right at you and gets those 2 bounces right off the bat, like you're pretty much done. Tennis is by far. And the amount of like shifting you have to do on a full size court, it's a process. So, and wheelchair lacrosse. I forgot I did wheelchair lacrosse for a little while. That one was fun.
All right. And so now you've just stuck with climbing, huh? That's kind of like the big.
Yeah. I stopped doing other sports in like 2020. Like I started climbing in 2016 and I stopped doing other sports because I was trying to make a big push to become professional and really focus in on that. And well, it worked. So I can't really do a lot of other sports because my contract depends on me climbing and doing other things for climbing. So really focused in on the climbing and the outdoor sport industry. So a little bit of cycling here and there.
Okay. All right. And I saw on your Instagram that you're doing some SPI training. How's that going?
That's going pretty well. I'm working on how quickly I can make my systems because right now I would not make the time requirement. So I'm trying to get dialed in on like tying my knots efficiently, finding the right anchors, just increasing that knowledge. That way I can just like go off the cuff with that and make sure like I'm pretty set and solid so I can get things done in a quicker manner. So that's my big thing is like trying to like make that process quicker because right now all my processes are 10 to 15 minutes too slow.
Okay.
So
I gotcha.
Like,
and then are you hoping to guide?
Huh?
Are you hoping to guide after this with the SPI?
I'm hoping to guide a little bit. There's a guiding company called Inspire here in Salt Lake that has the opportunity to do some adaptive outdoor stuff. And the person running it is also an adaptive athlete, but he wants to make sure like it's other adaptive athletes and adaptive guides teaching adaptive people how to climb outside. That way people feel more comfortable and get a little more in tune with the inspiring factor type of deal. Like when not inspiring factor, but like more of the learning from people who have had to adapt around similar issues. That way we're bridging the gap because most of us that get into adaptive sports and especially adaptive climbing, it's like there was a huge trial and error phase in our lives where getting to like performance climbing and performance setups and stuff like that just took a little while because we had to do things slightly differently. So we're trying to bridge that like learning curve now. It's like bring in the adaptive athletes that way people don't have to trial and error so much and that we can skip 3 steps rather than have 20 steps to get to the same spot type of deal.
That's cool, man. And that's good that they're getting it out, and like that does help a lot, and that's awesome that that guy's helping out. All right, man. So, were you ready to dive on in?
I'm ready.
All right, dude. So, Ben, I read your article. I guess it was like along the lines of the ones about fighting demons and stuff like that. And it kind of went back and talks about your past. And so, I definitely want to explore because I know you said you were born with spina bifida, and growing up, it sounded like in that article that your family was like very supportive, and they were like, "Hey, you're going outside. We're going and doing this, and you're coming." Would you say that's like maybe contributed to where you've gotten to now, or kind of helped, or
Yeah, yeah, I would definitely say that's helped. I grew up in a working class family, so all my uncles were contractors, truckers, stuff like that. My dad was a mechanic. My mom was a school teacher. So definitely more along the lines of growing up in a definitely, I would say, rougher family in terms of like we had to figure things out a little in more creative ways. And so when we went and did vacations or something like that, we were always thinking about how to do certain things. And so that problem solving aspect that my dad's a very engineer oriented mind from all of his mechanic work. Um, so he always had a problem solving mind in the first place. So that influenced me to like problem solve around what I have in front of me with my disability to figure out how to do the same things that like my sister wanted to do or that my family were doing in general. Like we just kind of problem solved around it as much as we could. Like my dad would build certain contractions to make sure that I had an easier way to get around or um, walk around in the wilderness, mainly like the beaches. Like we had to modify a couple sandals on occasion to make sure I was a little more balanced and my leg lift difference wasn't as bad. It's kind of hard to get a lift on sandals sometimes, so we definitely made some accommodations there. It's just like that general problem solving thing that my dad always had. He passed down to me, which allowed me to problem solve around all the other sports that I did. So it was actually pretty helpful.
so? I mean, it sounds like they were like really supportive, even though like you were born. That's like, hey, we're still a family. We're still going out. They want to get you out and about. And so, then did they also support when you started getting into like your athletic endeavors, or they encourage you to do that?
Yeah, they encouraged me to. We were a big sports family in the first place. My dad's side was more along the lines of running ultimate frisbee and the outdoor sports, while my mom's side of the family was more team oriented sports like softball, volleyball. So like my dad's side was more individualistic. Like my dad and uncle were both climbers in the 80s. My uncle was a climber through his whole entire life. My dad did a lot of kayaking and windsurfing when he was in his 20s and 30s. And then my mom's side was all softball or baseball, very team sport oriented. So just growing up in that family in general, when I wanted to get involved in sports, they weren't gonna like deny me access to going to try out regular t-ball and regular baseball. There was a certain point in time where I realized that my ability level with my body and all the other kids' ability level was getting drastically bigger. Like when you're kids, like in general, like the ability level isn't that noticeable. But as you get older, like hitting the middle school era, that's when you notice like that ability level and started to change pretty big. So um they were never really like, no, you can't do this or whatever. They just kind of figured out a way so I could do it. And then in 2006, I got involved in wheelchair basketball, and that kind of bridged that gap. So, learning how to do an adaptive sport and getting to play with people with similar ability levels and learning how to do the same problem solving I had to do became a little bit easier. So, I just went through that adaptive sport um, track after like 2006. Um, and just kept on chugging away. It kind of like built up the necessary skills I needed to have. The program that I was involved in allowed me to see other adaptive athletes and how they were adapting and becoming adults and how to be an adaptive adult and still do the problem solving, doing the same normal stuff that everybody else is doing, just a little bit differently. It also involved a lot of travel. So I learned how to travel at a very young age. I think I learned how to fly on my own in like when I was like in the seventh grade, seventh or eighth grade, just how to like build like the right adaptive system for myself so I could like get through the airport efficiently.
That's what did you build something or did your dad build you something? What was your system like for that?
Normally just a backpack and a duffel bag. That was like the easiest way to travel with a wheelchair was to have a backpack as you're like carry on like everybody else, but everyone would do these like roller bags, and that just wasn't like efficient when pushing a wheelchair around in the airport. So I learned that like you had to have like a smaller duffel bag to like sit on your lap, and that was the most efficient way to get through the airport was having a backpack and a duffel bag. And then your one check bag was a roller bag, but not like a four-wheeled roller bag. A lot of people thought like four-wheeled roller bags were going to be like the easiest thing for wheelchairs. Turns out it is the hardest thing to push around. Um, and they're like, my parents were like, "Why don't you like this?" I was like, "It just goes everywhere. It's a revolving caster, so like it just goes wherever it wants to go. Like if you don't load it in the right way, it either leans to the right or leans to the left." So what I ended up finding out was like the two-wheeled roller bags, but like the North Face duffel bags, the expedition style um, roller bags were actually like the easiest to control as long as you pushed it forward instead of dragged it behind. So you would put it in front, use um, the handle and put it in between your legs, and then just pushed your chair like that. It was like the easiest way to get around with a roller bag, actually. And everyone was like, "Why is that the easiest way?" I was like, "It just works." I don't know, but the four uh, wheeled travel bags were always the worst. Like, couldn't stand it.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I hear you.
just the small details that you learn throughout your life, just to make your life a little bit easier.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because, like, when you go back and you talk about playing around kids with like similar ability levels and stuff like that, and how you had to learn at a young age to learn like an adaptive way, like a workaround, which is actually kind of how this podcast started. As I read a book, Matt Fitzgerald wrote "How Bad Do You Want It?" I don't know if you've ever read it, and then there's a chapter about Willie Stewart and the workaround effect. Because he ends up losing his arm and becomes like a rugby player and an Iron Man, and so I think that's really interesting to like figure out how like you guys use specific things to work around stuff. And so what is something specifically that you've had to learn to adapt to? Like, I know climbing, yes, but are there other things specifically, like in life in general, like daily tasks that you've had to figure out? Or
Learning how to carry things inside of my family. Like again, contractors and mechanics, like there was a certain way, like my parents didn't like tell me not to help them out with certain um aspects of like yard work and stuff like that. So I still had to like help out with yard work and um helping carry bricks around and stuff like that. So I learned how to carry things in a certain way that specifically like heavy things, like i.e. bricks. Like I would pick them up and you know how like some people like hold a hand out in front of them and carry like bricks and a load of bricks like that so that they can stay pretty stable. That didn't work for me with my gait. So I ended up learning how to pinch from the side with both hands. So I would put like two bricks in each hand and just pick it up. And I just learned how to have like a stronger grip strength from a very young age. And that actually translated into climbing uh, just because like my grip strength was already so good because I had to like pick things up from the side and carry them in a very specific way. Like I was always doing farmer carries basically to help out um around the yard, was like just doing normal farmers carries just because like that was the only way I could walk with a load. And my dad was always like looking at me every time. He was like, and I was like, this is the only way. Like I've tried I've tried every way you've told me. This is the way I have to do it. And he's like, that's extra work, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, but like this is the only way I can actually walk around with the bricks or walk around with whatever you want me to walk around with. Or like the other thing I do is like when I'm carrying boxes, I just throw it up on my shoulder, on my right shoulder, and carry it like that. That way I still have my left hand free with my cane. So I'll carry like a huge box just on top of my shoulder. No matter what it is, if it's like it would seem easier to like put in front of you, I'm like, nah, just put it on my shoulder because that's the only way I can actually walk around with it. So like a lot of farmers carries and a lot of like just looking like I'm trying to be strong when in unnecessary situations, but it's literally the only way I could figure out how to carry things with my gait.
okay, yeah, I love, yeah, throwing it up over your shoulder is so much easier than like carrying it. And then I can see how, because I know you're really famous for your grip strength. I was listening to a podcast this morning about, it was a training podcast you're on. You're talking about how you went and picked up someone's working weight and like their grip strength. So that's pretty awesome, man. And so it sounds like that you have a really good relationship with your family. So that's like really interesting and or amazing,
We
actually,
have
not
a
interesting.
we have a very good ability. We have a very good relationship with how we work around obstacles. It's not always the easiest relationship in the world, but the way we're able to figure out problem solving is like the one thing my family does well with each other. We're able to figure out how to get around certain things. And I think that's where our relationship's pretty good. There are other aspects of my family relationship that aren't always the best, which like everyone has those issues. But our ability to kind of like look at a problem and figure it out right then and there is kind of like our go-to way of like family bonding. Unfortunately, it's a little trauma bonding too, but I that's just the reality of like when you have to raise a person with a disability. It's a lot of trauma bonding and a lot of problem solving. And that's one thing we've always kind of talked about in our family is like our ability to see something and just move forward is very good, but we don't have we don't really ever have time to process what's going on. We're a very like next step type of family. Like, oh, this obstacle showed up. What's our next step to get around this obstacle? It doesn't, I feel like the one place where my family's definitely has had issues in is like our ability to process what's going on so it doesn't affect us later. So, like, that self reflection part of my family has always been a little bit muddy. Um, we've always just kind of looked at something and, like, yeah, let's just get through this. We'll take care of the next part later, type of deal. And then the next part comes way later than we anticipated. And it shows up in a interesting way. But our first initial, like, how do we work around a problem initially is very good. It's just like we tend to find the first one or two solutions and we don't find the best solution type of deal. But it's just kind of how we had to be. It's kind of how my parents had to raise me because they were also learning how to be around someone with a disability all the time, too. Like, I was the firstborn. Like, they didn't have like an instruction manual of how to raise a kid with such complicated issues or how to raise a kid in general. Because for my mom, I was the firstborn. So they were still kind of trying to figure out how to take care of a kid, but also take care of him with so many other issues. So um, they also had to learn with me and learn beside me. So it's kind of one of those um, weird paradigms where you learn together, but also you probably did not find the best solution until much later.
A lot of trial and error, and kind of like we're learning this as you're learning it too, kind
Yeah,
of thing.
yeah,
Okay.
very much so.
Um, so what would you tell a parent that, as maybe has a kid in that situation and the kid is wanting to get into like adaptive sports and the parent is maybe like hesitant, right? What would you kind of tell one of those parents, or how do you talk to parents of like kids that you work with? Because I know you do work with the kids and I know
Yeah,
you work with adaptive individuals, but like what advice would you give the parent that might be concerned, right? Maybe they're kind of treating their kid with kid gloves per se.
yeah. If they're, I let them know, I'm like, you have to let them fail. You have to let them experience something. If you can't allow them to experience failure inside of a sport, then how are you going to allow them to experience failure in life? Because one of the biggest things in life is we learn from experience, we learn from failure, we learn how to rise above it and how to build something better when we usually literally shit the bed type of deal.
No, you're good. Yeah.
Yeah. So my first thing is you always have to let them fail. And you have to let them feel that failure. That way they can make their choice whether to rise to the occasion or to hide. And that's the only way you can really kind of figure out how to move forward with a disability later in life. I think sports has allowed me to have such a good realm of like, hey, we're not always going to get things right on the first try. Hey, we're not always going to have like every single play go flawlessly. Everything's not going to be like this perfect organized thing all the time. Like when you look at a basketball game, everybody wins and loses possessions, right? They they get a bucket, sometimes they miss a bucket, sometimes the other team scores, but in that 40 minutes between the successes and failures, there's an ultimate outcome of that game. Whether or not you win or lose is another thing. So like if you can't learn from like a simple game of basketball that like everything you do in life isn't going to be utterly perfect, then you have to rethink your whole entire realm. So I think adaptive sports and everything is a way for kids to actually learn, hey, things aren't going to be perfect. Hey, things aren't going to be lovey-dovey or sugar coated. Like there is a learning lesson in that. And that's not just with like adaptive sports, that's with every sport. And I think that's a crucial learning aspect for everyone. So for a parent that's hesitant, I'm like, this is a key learning opportunity for them because it'll eventually allow them to take lessons from this game or this experience or this sport and apply it to their actual life. It's honestly like one of the biggest classrooms I've ever had was adaptive sports because I've learned so much through the lessons I've learned from wheelchair basketball, the lessons I've learned from climbing, the lessons I've learned from everything where I'm like, these are things that I can apply to the rest of my life and kind of fix some realms and problem solve around what's going on with me in general. So I think sports and my research in my undergrad was um, how much adaptive sports actually helps people with spinal cord injuries and born with neurological issues. It shows a mastery of skill. So when people get this mastery of skill from like learning how to shoot a basketball or learning how to pick up a basketball with their chair or learning how to do a certain move in climbing, like that mastery of skill helps build a overall confidence in which they carry on the lessons they've learned from that sport into the rest of their life because overall it's going to help them with their depression, it's going to help them with anxiety, it's going to help them with their ability to problem solve. So everything that's in that aspect, I just encourage parents to like, hey, don't actually helicopter them. Let them fall. Let them hit their face. Let them get a concussion or two, because that's what normal kids do.
You're not wrong. Uh, So what about the kid that maybe is like too scared to do it or is like uncertain, like, I want to do it, but I don't, or I'm scared about this, I'm scared about that. Like, I mean, I know failure is the best teacher, but like some of these kids are just, they might be scared. What kind of advice would you offer them?
I'm usually pretty forward with them. I'm like, hey, I know it's not easy. I get it. You're scared. But ultimately, we have to experience this to figure out if this is the right fit for us or if we need to find a different sport or if we need to find a different thing. You have to allow yourself to fail and experience a little bit of pain because I won't lie, like every sport I've done, there's been some sort of pain. But if we experience a little bit at a time and slowly build up with that and build up our skills and build up our knowledge, we're eventually going to be able to do the things that are hard fairly easy. So I'm straight up with every kid. I'm like, hey, this stuff's hard, but I think we need to try it. And I think we need to learn from it. And so I always give them the opportunity to try at their own level. And then at the end of everything, and this is something I do teaching wise with anyone with type of fear, especially when you're like teaching climbing, like people have a fear of falling or a fear of anything. Usually after they fall or something like that, I'm like, how are you? Are you okay? Are you hurt? What did you learn from that? Kind of give them the question so that they can give themselves the answer. It's usually prompting a question to give themselves an answer. So as long as we can try and experience that, I always prompt that question afterwards. I'm like, are we dead? What was hard about that? What was challenging about that? What do you think is the solution? And if their solution is completely off of the solution I see, I'll lead them back towards a middle ground. But usually it's a lot of prompting questions to people. What is scary about it? What is hard about it? And are we okay after we do it? And usually that allows people to start seeing, oh, I'm going to be okay. Oh, we're going to be fine. And it's definitely, I try and encourage a lot. I use the whole entire, like, if I'm doing it, you can do it type of deal. Like,
Okay.
I'll explain my whole entire list of things that's wrong with me. And I'm like, am I doing it? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, do you think it was easy? And they're like, probably not. And I'm like, okay, then what's stopping us? Why are we having such an issue with this? And they're like, well, I'm scared. I'm like, so was I. But there's only one way to get around that.
Just gotta
And
do
it's
it.
you just got go and do it. And we can help you with the skills. We can help you with feeling more confident about it. But ultimately, we have to take that fall or have to take that failure. So, and just learn from it. I mean, honestly, like when you look at professional athletes, like what's the best hitters only get on base 30% of the time in baseball?
Really?
Yeah, best hitters only 30 to 40% of the time. That's all they get on base. So, it's not like they're going to get on base every single at bat. That's a very big rarity is for a hitter at a professional level to get on base every single time. So, you always got to look at that. I'm like, when you look at like, I wouldn't use Barry Bonds. Probably Barry Bonds is probably a bad example, but like, I grew up in the steroid era of baseball. Um,
Uh, how old are you? What? How old are you, Ben?
I turned 30 next Tuesday, next Wednesday.
Oh, bro, we're the same age. We got the same
Yeah,
name. We're basically the same age. This is dope. Yeah. Okay. So I'm right there with you. The Barry Bonds era. I
the
remember that
Barry
stuff.
Bonds era, the Sammy Sosa era. That one year
Yeah.
Sammy Sosa played for the O's. Because I'm from Baltimore,
Hmm.
and that was a big thing. Was like when Sammy Sosa came to the O's, it was like a big deal. Yeah, some of the best hitters in the world only got on base 30% of the time. When you look at how many shots are in a hockey game, typically,
Oh yeah.
it's usually 40, 50 shots on net, and maybe 3 go in a whole game.
Yeah. It's not a
Well,
lot. I mean, they go most quarters without scoring if they're lucky.
yeah. When you look at basketball, like, and I played basketball at a high level, you take basketball one possession at a time. So everything you just kind of learn to move on. Like our my wheelchair basketball coach gave me one of the best lessons I've learned in my life and always still learn is next play. What's the next step? We lost that possession. We messed up that possession, but there's always another possession coming forward. And so I've applied that to my life. Like I messed up this, but there's always going to be something else coming forward. How can I make sure that that's going to be the best option for me? Or even in climbing, I might have messed up one sequence. How do I get back on sequence to keep pushing forward inside of a climb? Like you just can't just stop and quit in the middle of a climbing competition. So you always have to do something else type of deal. There's always another play. There's always another instance where you can better what's going on.
It's just learning, right? It's
Yeah.
just like, hey, you got to, life's not fair. You've been given an unfair situation, but it's like the best thing you can do is face your fear, face the failure, go out there and learn, because you're only just going to get better, and so is your life. So it's
Mhm.
like, you got to do this. And then kind of like how you guys have communities. But I kind of want to ask, is there a like defining moment for you that something like that happened where you just had this epiphany where you're just like, I got to go do it?
I think the first time I went climbing, I always knew I wanted to try bouldering. And 2016, I stopped playing wheelchair basketball. You know, I was like, well, I need something to replace that discipline. Like, I went through wheelchair ball, getting up at 4:30 in the morning every morning for 5 years, and then all of a sudden, I just kind of stopped playing. I was like, I need something to replace my discipline with. I've always wanted to try this thing. Why not? Let's try and do this one thing type of deal. So I went with a friend, had a friend that was not really an experienced boulder, but like went pretty often. And he was like, you would love it. And I was like, I've always wanted to do that. My family, my dad and uncle were climbers. Like, I've always had this fascination with like boulders and rocks and trying to climb things. So I'm like, why not? And so I literally went to this bouldering gym off of I-70 in mid Missouri while I was in college called the Bouldering Garden. And I tell you, it was not like when you think about like modern day gym safety standards, like this place had a slack line going down the middle of the gym that people tripped on constantly. Um, it was right in between a contracting business and a liquor store.
Oh, best place for a climbing gym. Did it also have the tape on there instead of like the colored holds?
Always taped. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
always taped. You walked in there, you thought you were going to get white lung from all the chalk that was in the air. Like, it was the
Oh,
most grungy working class gym I've ever been to. And I'm like looking around, I was like, like looking back at it and knowing our community now, I'm like, man, half these people wouldn't have even like walked. If this was their first experience, they would have never walked in. They
no, they
would
would have been like, nope, I'm done. I'm out.
have.
Screw this.
And my first experience was okay, like let's figure this out. I'm like, well, I'm not good at slab. Let's try this overhang thing. And literally, the first time I pulled on, I was like, oh, this is what I was supposed to do. Like, I had an epiphany of just like I pulled on my first boulder problem, and I'm like, I think I'm supposed to be doing this. I think I'm supposed to be trying to figure out how to become better at this. Like, I've played so many different sports. Like, wheelchair basketball was a great team building sport, great lesson learning sport. It just kind of, I was too small. Like, I can't tell you how many of my like 7 or 8 concussions came from wheelchair basketball. I think a
Oh,
solid
damn.
5 of them came from wheelchair ball.
Okay. Jesus, you're rough out there, huh?
Um, I just took elbows to the head a lot
Yeah.
just because I was a smaller guy. And like I just got beat around a lot. That was just the reality of like the sport. And how my size played with that sport. Like it was just a rough sport in general. I broke my back playing that sport.
Oh,
And I didn't know it. I honestly didn't know it. Like just kind of
really?
shook it off. Yeah. Thought I pulled a back muscle. I was like, I just laid down for a weekend and then went back to practice Monday. And then amidst of my climbing career, I went and got my rods checked out because things weren't really like working right. Like I kept
Yeah.
having like a little bit of a slippage or something.
Okay.
So I went and got it checked out. And my doctor's like, when did you break your back? And I broke my back? And she was
Huh.
like, you didn't know you broke your back. And I'm like, nope, had no idea. And she was like, was there a period in time where you were like, had a lot of back pain? I was like, well, there was this one time where I was like laying down for like a weekend. And she was like, a weekend? And I was like, yeah, just a weekend. I thought I pulled a back muscle. And she's like, that's when you did it. Because it looks to be roughly about that old type of deal. So, like, wheelchair ball just didn't really work for me. And then when I started pulling on holds, I was like, oh, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. And I think this is where my passion lies. And I think I'm going to stop everything else and try and figure out how to do this in the best possible way because this just seems right. It was the first thing that actually kind of made sense because, like, I've always had to figure out ways to get around different environments. And that's what climbing is. It's figuring out how to move your body in ways to get around different terrain. And my whole entire life experience has been trying to figure out how to walk around certain terrain, how to push my chair in the city, how to make sure like I'm looking for certain things to make sure I have the most efficient movement in that environment. And that's literally just climbing. Is trying to figure out where the holds are so you can efficiently move your body in that environment. And
So, what makes climbing so special to you, though? And the reason I asked that is I talked to another guy, and I agree with him. And like being a climber myself, like climbing to me saved my life. Like climbing is the best hobby that I have, an activity that I do. And it seems like you just said that it's just something that you just felt like you had to do. Like this is it. Like you just had this epiphany. Like what about it, and what about climbing just makes it so special for you?
it's that overall like problem solving that I've always done in my whole entire life that just kind of made it mine. It was for the first time, it was a sport I did where the way I had to work with the sport was be creative in my own way. Like there was always people like trying to give beta and everything, but like that beta really wasn't going to work for me. It was finally a
Right.
sport where it was like purely mine, like purely my style, purely like everyone has a style of play, right? And a style of expression. And if you're not able to express who you are and express the your feelings inside of your sport, then you're not going to rise to like a high level or the level you want to rise to. With climbing, it was a way for me to express like my my dark times, my need to succeed, my need to problem solve, and my need to just be a badass G sometimes. um and just allowed me to express everything about who I was and the emotions that I feel and how I'm moving through life. And if you look at my style from the beginning to now, it's very much like your climbing movement is completely about that full maturity. Like, what are you feeling that allows you to feel a thuggy style of climbing? What do you feel that allows you to feel a more controlled style of climbing? I've definitely become more controlled over my years, but mentally, I've also been a little more controlled. Like when I first started climbing, I was finding out I was bipolar. I was finding out I had a lot of different psychological issues, and it just was a very aggressive style of climbing back then. now it's a little more controlled. I'm a little more refined. And so it's that overall expression of just what you're learning in life and that maturity that is purely special. And I think that's what really makes it special to me now, is just like that overall, like, full notoriety of like where you were when you started to like where you are now. Like, yes, I can still climb extremely thuggy. I can still climb extremely sporadic, which means like, yeah, I still have a couple of mental things that pop up here and there, but overall, it's the mindset and the problem solving is a much more refined style. And I'm a much more refined version of who I was just because I've had so many more years of learning. So climbing is just special because it's your pure ability to express what's going on in your life through movement.
Because it's
Yeah.
yours, right? It's like it
Yeah.
gives you this pure freedom to express you, who you are, right? For example, people call you, what is it, the Ben Hulk or whatever? I think is what I saw in the
Hulk
article. You got a
smash. Yeah.
nickname.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, stuff like that. You mentioned that, you were diagnosed with bipolar. You found out when you were climbing. Can you explain a little bit about that? And maybe did that sort of put things into place that maybe you noticed early on, but then when you finally got that diagnosis, you were like, it clicked and you're like, yes, this explains a lot. And now I have something that I know I can handle and at least
Yeah.
control
Yeah.
versus.
So I always had this thing in like wheelchair basketball where I would have days where I just crushed practice or crushed a game and literally arose to the occasion. And I didn't know why. And then there were days where I just utterly sucked. Like, and it would be like within a week, I'd be like extremely good, extremely bad, extremely good, extremely bad type of deal. And one of my coaches was a complete and utter asshole in a way where he was like, "Are you bipolar or something?" Like, just I was like, "I don't know. I don't know what's going on." It seems like consistency's always been a hard thing for me. And then when I was diagnosed with it, I was like, "Oh, my ability level to turn on my try hard is dependent on my moods." And so when I was figuring that out in wheelchair ball, and then when I got diagnosed with it in climbing, I was like, okay, so like I had this issue when I was playing wheelchair ball. How do I minimize this issue now? And then how do I use that manic sense to arise to the occasion? So I kind of learned how to build a baseline, learned what my body needed, learned what exercises I needed to do to create like just a general baseline of like normality. Um, and then when it came comp time, I used to purposely trigger my manic spells. That way I could use that full ability to be creative and that full ability to just try hard to get it done. Was that the healthiest thing to do? No, not at all, actually. Because usually the day after I did well, I was usually the most depressed. And so now I've kind of like figured out a way to channel that demon, channel that creativity, and channel that try hard in a more efficient way by building those baselines a little bit better and knowing how to turn on that baseline. Usually a lot of espresso and Red Bull. Um, but because I'm bipolar B, so like I'm more down than up, and
Okay.
so I need like some sort of stimulus to bring me up to like functioning standards.
That way you drink a pot of coffee a day.
Yeah, but basically a pot of coffee. Now it's a French press. I'll do a French press of coffee a day.
Okay. You
Or
getting all
like
fancy, huh?
I got a little fancier in my years. It's also a little quicker than just
Yeah.
You can boil water, drop some beans and ground beans in some in a French press, and then fill it up, and then just press it, and it's ready to go. Um, so a lot of French press. A lot of my friends like pour overs. I'm like, I'm not a pour over guy. I like my French press. I like my dark blends. Um, I like questioning if I had too much caffeine or not. It just kind of brings that stimulus and brings that focus up a little bit more. So, and that's just taken years and years of just learning how to function and learning how to be efficient with who you are. Um, Especially with the bipolar stuff, that just takes years. And the more I talk to people, the more I learn that people aren't as put together as they seem. Like,
No. Mm-mm.
um, they come off in a very put together way, but like in actuality, everyone's kind of like falling apart and faking through it more than you think they are. And that's one thing I've noticed over the years where I'm like, yeah, that it's not as when people are like, man, they just have everything. I'm like, I guarantee you there's something going on that you don't even see.
So what
Because
would you tell those people? Like that they're just like you know, because like I guarantee everybody, like you said, has their problems and they're falling apart. So for someone that's probably listening to this right now, what would you say? Like, you know, it's easy to sit here and say that, but you've gone through, you have your experience.
every human is trying to figure out where they fit in and where they belong inside of life. And you just have to have a greater understanding for everyone. Just because everyone's actually trying to go through something, everyone's trying to figure something out. And just asking questions is the most important thing. They might not share, they might not be fully open, but just know like if you see some sort of erratic behavior or you see someone that's like really well put together, there's something always going on because we're just naturally human. And humans aren't the most put together person in the world. Even if they're the most put together person in the world organization wise, I guarantee you they they are dealing with some sort of mental issue that makes them organized like that. Whether it be OCD or they need so much structure that that's their only way to function. Like usually our strongest characteristics are also our weakest characteristics. So when you see someone with a strong characteristic one way or another, I guarantee you that's also their biggest weakness. It's it's been very true in my life. It's been very true in a lot of other people's lives that I've gotten close to. So usually our biggest strength is also our biggest weakness. Like my biggest strength is passion. That's also my biggest weakness because I feel so much more than I should. It allows me to be very good at things, but it also allows me to be devastated by things. And trying to figure out that balance has always been an issue. So anyone that has a strong characteristic, that strong characteristic it will also bring them down. So just always keep that in mind. And that's always where we're going to learn. That's always where we're going to do well. But it's also reasons why people don't always do well. So I always kind of keep that in check. It helps me for performance wise too. So like if I'm having a strong season and I have one bad comp, I'm like, okay, well, I did well in this and this and this, and that's just kind of the reality of things now. I don't like beat myself up over it. I'm like, okay, yeah, sucky. That was kind of rough. And now I'm in a realm of like trying to figure out where to move on. And I'm quicker to move on now because I just accept ultimately. And I think I'm at that age at 30 where like you start accepting things of like, that's just the reality of it. And we're going to have to work around it. I'm at that age where I'm starting not to give a fuck. I think that's a very crucial part. And I think some of the best years are in the next 5 to 6 years for me because I'm getting at that point where I'm like, I care, but I also know how not to care and how not to let certain things affect me in the way that they used to when I was in my 20s.
You think it's like the maturity with the age, or do you think it's just experience over time and just taught you how to handle more things, and then things that you've gone through really just contributed to that?
I think it's experience, but also a fully functioning frontal lobe. Or let me rephrase that: partially functioning frontal lobe, a more developed frontal lobe. Because I look at decisions I make now, and I'm like, man, I would have never made this decision like when I was in my 20s because my 20s wasn't even thinking about this type of deal. And where now I'm trying to make decisions that aren't always the best, but it's because I'm finally thinking about those decisions. I'm thinking about how to make quality of life a little bit easier. Whereas when I was in my 20s, it was just like something that wasn't on my forefront. There's just things that you eventually, because your frontal lobe becomes more developed and because you learn from experience and learn from different, it's kind of both. It's just like development and just pure learning that you start thinking about other things. Like I drive around now and I'm like looking at people's front lawns and I'm like, oh, that's a nice front lawn. Like they did a really good job. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here type of deal.
Oh no, you're like the progressives. Like, oh, when you got progressive, you become your parents. You seen that
Yeah.
commercial?
Yeah.
uh,
And you start looking at like what's the best deals for like car insurance or what's the best deals for like when you're trying to figure out what's the best actual value for your money type of thing in anything. I'm like, oh man, I'm really turning into my parents. I'm turning into my family. I'm turning into everything I said I wouldn't.
yeah, right. I'll never do this. I'll never do that. And then all of a sudden, it's like here we are, 30 years old. Like, yeah, I got to start thinking about like health insurance and like dental and that yard looks good. Does this neighborhood have HOA? You got to pay the rent.
Yeah.
Life gets fun as you get older,
Yeah, I'm really looking for a neighborhood that doesn't have an HOA.
right? I don't blame you. My parents doesn't, which is nice. So they're like one of the last neighborhoods that doesn't have an HOA. Thank God. So they
No,
got
I,
lucky with
I want
that.
I want chickens. So chickens for eggs. So trying to find an HOA that won't be mad if I have a garden or something in the back.
There you go. What you guys gonna grow? Besides, I mean, you're gonna have chickens, but you're gonna grow stuff too. I take it.
Um, anything? Probably a lot of carrots and peppers. I like I like a lot of bell peppers or
Okay.
tomatoes. So like if I can have a garden where I can grow some tomatoes and bell peppers, I guarantee you I'll probably kill them the first season or two. But I'll probably like watch a bunch of YouTube videos and still end up killing my plants. But
Yeah, I'm not a green thumb either.
but yeah, just a lot of peppers, like bell peppers especially, or sweet peppers. Um, I'm a big pepper guy. Um, tomatoes, carrots,
Yeah.
maybe some potatoes.
So, Ben, we talked about how like climbing is like important. You get to express yourself, kind of the freedom that comes with it. So, like the community in climbing's amazing. I've experienced it, you've experienced it. Like, going back to our conversation about like some of those kids that maybe are like too, or not, I use kids, but because I feel like some of them might just be, they might be taking things a lot harder, because I mean, we've all been kids and sometimes it's easy to get judged and other things. And they might either a little more scared to try things where they're adults love the community aspect. So like, what about the climbing community has just been so great for you, or what have you found, what kind of effect did it have on you, whether it be performance or personally, and then like your athletic career?
The climbing community overall has just allowed me to experience a lot of different people and hear a lot of different opinions and just kind of learn more about humans in general, especially inside the climbing community it was kind of where I realized that like everyone's not as put together as they seem to be. Like when I was really introduced to the climbing community, I would see friends would tell me certain things and just certain worries, and I'm like, okay, everyone's kind of struggling with something. So like being involved in the climbing community really allowed me to open up my viewpoint and open up my just mind to everyone's kind of dealing with something and they're trying to figure it out, and everyone's trying to figure it out every single day. Um, but it's also been one of the most supportive communities because even when you're trying to figure it out, people are like, yeah, you're working towards it. You're actually putting effort into it. Or at least some of my best friends in my climbing community have said, maybe we should pump the brakes on something and take a step back and try and figure this out a little bit different. So the climbing community's meant a ton to me just because like it's taught me so much about human interaction. It taught me a lot about business because I've always worked in a gym. Um, Taught me a lot of how to be more professional in terms of like how to word ways and in how to word things in a way in which everyone can try and receive it. Um, it's allowed me to find the paraclimbing community in general. Like when I got introduced into it, it's allowed me to kind of relate to a lot of people that grew up in a very similar way that I did, and has allowed me to experience a good majority of the world and a good majority of like different cultures. It's just exposed me to so much more than I thought it would. Um, it's allowed me to travel. The climbing communities literally allowed me to do everything. It's allowed me to meet my fiance. It's allowed me to do so much more than I actually ever thought it would, just because I was around different people and then allowed myself to be open to different experiences. Um, I think that's one of the things we struggle with as humans in general is like, unless if Americans are traveling, we're typically not the most open people to different experiences or open to just going and hanging out. At least I wasn't. I wasn't always like open to go randomly wander off somewhere and hang out with people all the time. And then when I got involved with climbing, I was like, I would run into people and they're like, let's go wander off into the woods and just see what we find type of deal. So that exploration and that curiosity aspect has really kind of helped me in climbing. It's also given me my best friends, the people that have pushed me the hardest, um, the people that have been the most supportive of me, but also shown me some of the most harsh criticism possible. And it's allowed me to deal with criticism in a way that I wasn't exposed to when I was a younger kid. Um, and I think the climbing community was very crucial to that part. Specifically, the adaptive climbing community allowed me to just learn that the active climbing community in general allowed me to learn that everyone's going through some sort of issue at all times. They're trying to figure out life day to day. They're trying to figure out different obstacles to face. And really, that we're all kind of dealing with something more than just what's on the outside.
Would
And
you
that's
say it's
what
like a second family to you,
it,
the climbing community?
it's very much a second family. Like most of the time I travel, I end up staying with people that I've met through climbing or have met through paraclimbing specifically. I was just in Denver, yesterday, and I stayed at a friend's house because I was just passing through. And I was like, yeah, I was planning on driving. And she's like, no, you're kind of going to stay and make sure you get sleep so that you can actually make the drive tomorrow, type of deal. And like, I walked in and there was already food ready, and they made sure like I was fed. And I was like, I was just gonna go get something, and they're like, no, well, we're gonna take care of you. Like it definitely gave off a more of a family vibe than what I'm used to inside of a community. Usually it's like, oh, let's get a pizza, but no, like they actually cooked, and that was really nice and really wonderful to experience. I'm always grateful to the people that I sometimes I feel like a stray dog in which people are like, oh, let's just take him in and like make sure he's fed. He looks too skinny. Let's make sure he's eating something type of deal.
Oh
Um,
man, I hear you. And what's great too is like everybody's so supportive. I mean, like no one cares if you're like the best or the worst. Like everybody will encourage you no matter what. They're just like, cool, you did it better, whatever, try this, try that. Like you'll get it next time. Like that's what I've found has just been amazing about the climbing community. And I know we stick on climbing just because I think it's just what we love. So it's
yeah,
like easy to talk about it. And you can tell that we're just like it's amazing. There's nothing like it. And it's like, you know, and I feel like that probably, I bet it's what you try to do is try to bring a lot of people in, and especially the adaptive. It's just like, dude, you got to come try this. Like, your
yeah.
life will be different. Like, come try it. We want to help. It's a great time.
I definitely get stuck inside the instructor mode sometimes. But there are definitely times where like people are like, dude, how do I get into this? Like, can you teach me? I'm like, well, first off, like especially in I'll get messages on Instagram and stuff like that. How do I do this? What's the best option for this? I'm like, you just gotta go and try it. Take what's going on with you into account and work around that. But I'm like, the first thing you have to do is just go in and try. And that's the biggest thing you can do is just try and figure it out. A lot of us have had to do that. And a lot of people are like, "Oh, I only want to do it through like a organized thing." And I'm like, "Well, what's that going to bring you? You're going to hire somebody to belay you every time you want to go to the gym? How do you become independent? Go take a class. Go do something. Like go figure out how to be independent inside of it." And I think that's one of the biggest things that climbing's allowed me to do is like go learn how to be independent, but also rely on people that have the experience and will teach you something. Like some of my best friends have been like my trad mentors and my SPI mentors, and they're just good friends. Like I got to make sure I feed them at some point too, but like
I hear you.
um just some of the things I've learned through people is just like getting the chance to go out and hang out with people and then like, oh, go try it. Why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? Type of deal. and then you going to figure out if their help is actually helpful. And then truthfully, like it all is helpful because you're taking in someone else's perspective and trying it on for a moment and trying to figure out if it's going to work for you in the long term. So even if it's not going to work for you in the long term, it's allowing you that ability to just experience it right then and there and to figure basically to wear somebody else's shoe or someone else's prosthetic foot for a second. Like see if something that someone else is doing is going to be more helpful for you than you would anticipate. Like I didn't used to do the inside flag a lot, and then one of my best friends, Kyle, almost exclusively does his inside flag with his affected leg. And then I started doing an inside flag with my affected leg, and it was working better than I thought it would. And I was like, well, shit. I gave him shit for this for so long, and now it's actually working. And I'm like, well, gosh, all right, cool. Like, it just allows you to experience more and to figure out better ways of like dealing with stuff. It's just, it's been one of the best communities I've been a part of, and um, a very incestuous community at that, but still, some of the best friends I've ever had have come from the climbing community, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
I'd have to agree with you on that one. It is. If it wasn't for climbing, I wouldn't be where I'm on the path today. So, we're sitting here talking to you. And funny story, I actually think we've met before. Um, Real funny story. So, have you ever been to Hound Ears up in Boone?
Oh, twice, yes, for Triple Crown.
Yep. I think we met and talked. And I was like, because I got to look and I was like, this guy looks familiar. So yeah, it
Oh
was a
man,
pleasure meeting you,
what
by the way, in person. But I
what
just thought
year
it was
was
a funny
that?
story.
Which year at Hound Ears was that?
It had to be 2 to 3 years because I think it was before COVID.
2020,
I was,
or was
huh?
it 2019? Because I did Hound Ears in 2021 and 2019.
It was 2019 because I was helping a buddy because he worked for some rope company that was trying to come out with a climbing rope company. And so we set
Oh,
up. Yep.
oh, okay. All right. Yes, we. Okay, I know exactly. That might have been 2021. Was
Maybe it was something. I can't remember. I'm bad with years.
was it Arcadia or a different rope? I
It
know.
was the yeah.
I
You got
know.
it. Arm.
Yeah, I know. I know which one you're talking about. Okay,
Yeah.
I remember coming to the booth now. Yeah.
That was a good time, man. It was I'll put it this way, it was a privilege and a pleasure meeting you and talking to you that day. So because that was like when that was the height of when I was really climbing with Brittany Davis a lot. And so like yeah,
Yeah,
good
that
time.
was.
I thought it was funny.
Yeah, yeah, that was. Aaron and Brittany have been like great. I always give Aaron shit because he always puts a move on a set that I didn't like, and I was like, you know what I like? You've known me for how many years? And he's like, well, if I just gave you what you'd like all the time, how would you learn? And I'm like, well, just
I
help
don't
a
want to
brother
learn.
here. Like,
Yeah, I just want to win, damn it. Like,
just want to
like
win,
help
man.
me help you. I hear you, man.
Yeah,
Uh,
and he's always kind of laughed about that, and I've given some feedback, good and bad feedback about sets and stuff like that, and he's always taken it pretty well. And then
Brittany.
Brittany's just Brittany, and I've
Mhm.
always had a good relationship with Brittany and Aaron, so they've they've both done quite a lot, and I'm seeming to use Aaron a lot more for setting consultations with other competitions and stuff more and more now. So it's been quite a bit of a good overall friendship in general. I see
Yeah,
Aaron more than I see Brittany though. So I don't
kind of
think,
makes sense.
yeah, Brittany didn't come out this year. So
Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna see her next weekend, so I'm looking forward to it because I'm gonna sit down and she's gonna be the first episode I think I released, just because like it's just where it all started. So like I gotta do that, honor her that way too. She's her and Aaron, like I said, they're just incredible. I mean, you know that too, but
yeah, they're just
very
they're just good
thankful.
people.
Yeah, and so are you, man. I mean, you're doing so good. And like on the topic of like doing things that are great, reading that article, like what I thought was incredibly amazing was when you were coaching and you had, I think it was at around the same time as the competition, and you were going to miss the kids comp, and you wrote them all a letter. And so
Yeah,
I just want to point that out because a lot of people wouldn't do that. And that right there shows you how well connected and how well the climbing community is, like how close we are.
yeah. It's it's a real making sure I got those letters to those kids' parents and to make sure I texted their parents to make sure they gave it to the kids. That was more stressful than writing the letters.
I got you. Well, man, that was amazing. And I know every kid loved it. And so, I appreciate, yeah, getting tongue tied.
That it's a good thing, and I started that, and then I later found out other coaches were stealing that method. I'm like, that's the only method you're allowed to steal, type of deal.
Yeah.
I'm like, because that's an overall like. They're like, oh, Aaron wrote me a letter or something like that. And I was like, you know who used to write Aaron letters? And they were like, who? And I was like, this guy. And they were like, oh. And I was like, yeah. I was like, that was my old thing when I hear like kids I used to coach and now moving on to working with other coaches and stuff like that. They're like, oh, he wrote me a letter. And I was like, I'm glad that stuck around.
Yeah.
Just hearing that from other people that like grew up in my programs, and then when I moved away, and they're like, now the current coach or now the current manager is writing people letters to make sure their kids get inspired right before. I was like, that's a good impact to leave on a program that you were so dedicated to for so long, and seeing that one aspect of your coaching that really meant more to the kids emotionally than what it meant to them physically or meant to them in a movement coaching style was like that emotional support. And I'm so happy that that aspect stayed around at the old program I used to coach for. So, pretty cool thing to hear when I moved away. And
Good legacy to leave behind.
yeah,
Well, Ben, is there any like message you'd want to like just tell the world or, or share about adaptive sports in general?
take the whip.
Take the whip. I like it.
Take the whip. Always take the whip. Don't take because you're not going to learn much from it. Take the whip so you can learn something from it. Um, that's my biggest thing I want to tell the community. And if you're a part of the adaptive sports community and don't know what that means, it means go and take the failure first. Learn from the failure, move on. That way you can start building the important building blocks to make sure you can be successful later down the road. And that way you can help somebody else later down the road. So always take the whip.
Sounds good, man. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for your time today. I really loved it. Was a pleasure talking to you. It means a lot to me that you took the time to, have a video chat with me. And I look forward to letting you know when everything comes out. And I'll keep in touch with you and let me know how everything goes.
I will. It should be a interesting week today. I might climb today or I might take today off. I haven't decided yet, so we'll see here in a little bit. But I gotta, yeah, I gotta go get ready for work.
Yeah, I got to
Unfortunately,
get you out of here.
yeah, they did switch my schedule around. So,
That's all right. Well, you have a great evening, man. Thanks again for everything, and we'll keep in touch. All right.
all right, sounds good. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben.